Good afternoon or good evening. I'm very pleased to welcome you to the fifth session of LPI's Center for School and System Redesign Learning Series. As researchers, educators, policymakers, it is particularly important time to come together and to share our successes, our visions, and collective strategies for a future where all students are better served by their schools. The Reimagining Education webinar is a seven-part series hosted by our new center, which is funded in large part by the Stewart Foundation. It was conceived and designed with input from our co-sponsors, the UCLA Center for Community Schooling and the Gardner Center for Youth and Their Communities. High School Redesign, 10 Features for Success is the framework for our learning series. Our goal is to make it a living and breathing report in the digital space, so please see our resource bank with dozens of case studies, guides, videos, tools. But also, we bring you researchers to frame each feature and teachers, organizers, leaders to provide examples and strategies. The Center for School and System Redesign aspires to become a national hub that convenes, coordinates, and curates and brings together leaders who are facilitating school transformation and systems change. After my opening remarks, we'll have a research presentation by Dr. Karen Mapp, and then move to a moderated panel for a discussion about how students and families can be central to school culture, practices, and pedagogy. After our Q&A, we'll invite you to reflect on what you've heard and join a breakout room with members of the LPI's team. High School Redesign 10 Features for Success is a report that was launched last spring by Linda Darling-Hammond, Matt Alexander, and Laura Hernandez. The center builds on decades of research and connects the implementation of science and learning and development towards school transformation. Over the arc of our series, we are exploring how to develop meaningful relationships, culturally sustaining pedagogy and authentic curriculum, and assessments, as well as approaches that center students, families, and teachers in the decision-making process. As I've already mentioned, today's session is focused on designing schools that center students and families, and we'll learn about several frameworks for engaging students and communities. And in addition, we'll hear about student-led conferences and how this practice supports learners and their guardians. We've posted the video recordings of sessions 1 through 4, and we're really thrilled that many registrants are returning to view the webinars and hopefully to take advantage of the aligned examples, the research, and resources. And we hope that you'll return for our sessions in April, that session is on preparing educators and ensuring essential supports. And in May, we'll focus on authentic strategies for engaging communities and highlight a few community schools that we've been engaged with. Now I'm honored to introduce Dr. Karen Mapp. She's a leading scholar in family engagement to improve student experiences and outcomes. I was first introduced to her work in the late 90s when I was on staff at the Center of Collaborative Education, which was hosted at Northeastern at that time. Currently, she is a professor of practice at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and her research focuses on the cultivation of partnerships among families, community members, and educators that support success for all students, as well as district improvement. She holds an MA and doctorate from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. From 2011 to 2013, she served as a consultant on family and community engagement to the United States Department of Education in the Office of Improvement and Innovation. Dr. Mapp is an author and co-author of several articles and books from impact and development to effective family and community engagement practice, most recently including Embracing a New Normal towards a more liberatory approach to family engagement and Everyone Wins, the evidence for family school partnership and implications for practice. Welcome, Dr. Karen Mapp.
It's really great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I am going to jump right in because I have a short period of time to cover an awful lot of material that I hope will be helpful to this conversation and to your thinking and mindset about the importance of engaging families. And so I do want to take a little bit of time going over some of the research on what we know about the impact of family engagement and just recently published a book, although it seems like a long time ago, but it was 2022. And when my colleagues and I published Everyone Wins, and that just came from the understanding that we know now from the research that when we engage in partnerships with our families, with authentic partnerships, which I'll talk about in a minute in terms of what those are, everyone wins. We first did a publication back in 2012, which talked a little bit about the effects on family engagement and the outcomes of family engagement on just student outcomes. But now we have a lot more research which talks about the impact of engagement on educators, families, schools, and communities. But I also want to start out with this punchline and that is that engagement is a strategy and not a goal. So what do I mean by that? Let's focus particularly on the redesign work. A lot of times when I look at redesigned strategic plans, I see family engagement as one of the goals. But what I would want to encourage you to do and will challenge you to do is to see engagement as a strategy towards effective redesign and effective outcomes. Because when it's just sort of listed as a goal of our work and it doesn't really have an impact or a vision for what it's for, a lot of times it just becomes a random act, something that we just do because we think we're supposed to, but it's not aligned with our vision of where we want to be. And so you're going to see this slide twice because a lot of times when I do workshops and I do professional development, particularly with educators, with school leaders, I often think that they see family engagement as a nice to do and a nice to have, a feel-good strategy, but it's more than that. It actually is the way you reach your goals for your students, for your schools. And if you want to do true collaborative work, people need to know where we're going. That's why they stay together and that's why they work together. And again, if it's just a PR strategy, a nice to do in terms of, we want our families to know what we're doing and agree with what we're doing, but we're not really engaging them in the actual design work, that's a whole different story. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I wanted to start with that piece. And so again, what have we learned over the past 50 years of research about the impact of engagement? I'm going to go through these slides relatively quickly. I mentioned to you that Everyone Wins was published in 2022, but there's been other publications that have summarized the research on family engagement. Some of you may be familiar with a publication called The New Wave of Evidence. And so it was my students actually were the ones who sort of pushed me to say, Dr. Mapp, we'd really like to see research that's a little bit more current. We're reading studies that are 1999 and 1998, and we want to see some things that were written in our lifetime. And so Ann Henderson and I decided that we would do another version of our summary of the research, and that's where Everyone Wins comes from, which was published by Scholastic. And I'm just going to go over sort of the two big headlines. So what we do is we do these books for practitioners, for people like you in the audience who may not have time to go over 20, 30, 40, 200-page research studies on family engagement and the impact of it. And so we go through what we think is the best research, the best studies. We featured 40 in this particular publication. And then we kind of go through and see what are the themes. And there were two sort of big headlines that jumped out at us. And that was that these partnerships now, as I mentioned to you, don't just benefit students, they benefit everyone. And we actually now know more about what are the elements and the conditions of high impact practice around family engagement. What do you need to incorporate into your own practice in order for these partnerships to actually be effective and authentic? I'm not going to go through all the bullets on these because that would take up all the time. I intend to share these slides with you all. So if your participants, Cheryl, want these afterwards, they can be free to get them from me. This is what we know for our students when we are engaging with their families. And by the way, when I say family or parent in this presentation, I mean all adult caretakers, because we know that our families are made up of lots of different adult individuals. And a lot of times, especially if we're talking about our high school students, they will identify somebody in their family who they feel is a champion for them. That may not be a biological mom or dad. So we have to make sure we include all of the above, all the adult caretakers when we say families or parents. So when it comes to our students, these are some of the things that we see. Not only higher grades and test scores, but better attendance and a greater sense of self-efficacy and self-esteem. And as I said to you, we now know that these partnerships don't just benefit the kiddos, they benefit us as educators. And these are some of the things that we saw when families and educators work together. We are finding that that actually has an impact on how they see each other. So we have some studies in the book that tell us that when we are working together in partnership with our families, some of those biases, those deficit ways of thinking about our families and community actually dissolve because now we're working together. A lot of those stereotypes that we may hear about in the news, you know, we all hear these things and we all carry these biases, even though we may not want to admit it, we do. This is a way of really dissolving a lot of those because now we're working in partnership. We also find that our educators, when they are in schools and communities where family engagement is prioritized, there's a stronger morale. People feel better about the schools. And a lot of times practitioners stay at those places where there's strong family partnership because now they have a team. They feel like they're a member of a whole community because you know that for many of us, teaching can be pretty isolating. So when we're actually working in partnership with our families, we feel like we're a member of a team. Our families benefit as well when they're working with us on things like co-design, especially when it comes to the adolescents. I know we have adolescents with us today, and many times when I've interviewed our teenagers, they tell me that, you know, Miss, tell our families that it's really important to work with our educators. We're not going to tell them that because one teenager said to me, "It's my job to make things difficult for the adults in my life." But they really want us to be engaged in partnerships. So particularly at the adolescent stage, partnerships are really important. The teenagers have told me that they feel that engagement with their families is more important at the middle and high school level than at any other time in their lives. And so we really want to partner with our families because, you know, being adult caretaker of our adolescents these days is very difficult. And so again, when we work as team members, our families feel more confident in being able to have an impactful influence on their children. Okay, so that's a really, really important. For our schools, we see that when we engage in these partnerships, and this is really important for our redesign work, our schools just work better. We find that there's a more positive school climate. And then when we're talking with our families, we're more responsive to community needs. Some of you may be familiar with the 5 essential supports research out of Chicago, which showed that there are actually 5 ingredients to school improvement. It's now called the 5 essentials work. And as you can see, number 3 is parent and community ties. What these researchers found was that you have to have a family engagement strategy and element to your improvement of any school. And if you pull out the family engagement, it's like pulling out the main ingredient in a cake. The entire recipe falls apart. So I want to ask you, is engagement prioritized to that extent in your community? Because it needs to be. You will not be able to have a successful school without your families, without that engagement. You won't have an effective design if you don't engage your families, because they are a part of the health and wellness of the school. In terms of the communities at large, we also see great effects when we engage in these partnerships with our families. So the community starts to track that there are still children who are not involved in risky behaviors. And now we're working together a lot of times to bring community resources into the school. So I gave you a lot of information very quickly about what we know about the impact. So, you know, some of you that have seen me speak, I always talk about where's the beef, that good old oldie but goodie Wendy's commercial. Where's the beef around family engagement? So what I shared with you is the beef. That's what we see when we engage in these wonderful partnerships with our families. But now you're probably wondering, okay, that's great, but how do we do it? And so the way forward is something that I've been working on now for the past sort of 25 years. And some of you may be familiar with the dual capacity framework for family school partnerships. And this is a framework that I developed in collaboration with the Department of Education back in 2011 when I was working with them under the leadership of Arne Duncan and, of course, President Obama. And what they really wanted was some sort of guidance. You know, the federal government has titles, Title I, et cetera, that says you shall do family engagement. But there was very little guidance on the how of engagement. How do we actually do it? What do effective partnerships look like? And so, based on the research, I developed this framework, which was designed as a guide to help people think about what conditions need to be in place in order for me to have a really effective and authentic partnership with families. And so this slide is depicting the new framework, which I came out with in 2019 after collecting data from people who were using the first framework, which came out in 2013. And I think we all know what happened in 2020. And so people called me and they said, oh, Dr. Mapp, what are you going to do now? You just published this framework in 2019. We published this through a website, dualcapacity.org. How are you going to meet the moment of COVID? And I thought for a minute and I said, you know, it's actually the other way around. The moment is finally meeting the framework because people were very resistant to the kinds of conditions they needed to create to have authentic partnerships with our families, particularly families who are from disenfranchised communities. But during COVID and after COVID, I found that people were more open because, as we all know, we weren't doing any education without our families during COVID. And people became a lot more open to thinking about, okay, what do I need to do? What do I need to incorporate into my practice? And then what do the organizations need to do to support promising practice and family engagement? And that's what the framework is all about. It's loosely designed on a logic model. That was the feedback that we got back, that people wanted to see it in sort of a logic model fashion, where we start with the challenge. What is the challenge to engagement? And what we have found, and this is again a dual capacity building framework. So we're talking about what are the challenges that educators have faced? What are the challenges that families have faced that keep them from coming together in partnership? And these were some of the things that we identified. The big story out of the educators' challenges is that many of us never got trained. And in order to do family engagement work really well, you have to be trained. It is actually a skill. You know, one of my colleagues, Vita Borello, says people say, well, I'm an extrovert. That should help me engage with families. Well, that's maybe a little piece of it, and actually not much of a piece of it at all. It's about how do you treat families? Do you see families through the eyes of respect, et cetera, et cetera? So people have to be trained on it, because when they're not trained, a lot of times they will fall on deficit-based thinking when things don't go well. When the families don't show up, when you've designed a meeting and they're not there, sometimes people will go to, oh my goodness, you know, the families don't care, and that's really the case. Families also haven't been exposed to strong partnerships, and many of them, as we know, have had not great experiences when it comes to working with schools. One of my colleagues, Su Hung, talks about generational disrespect that institutions have shown to many of our families. So no, that one email that you send out or that one phone call that you make is not going to make up for a lot of what our families have experienced. So this is the section of the framework that's the most important. And these are the conditions. These are research-based conditions. I call them the essential conditions that need to be in place in order for us to create these authentic partnerships with families. The first set of conditions are the steps, because that's what a process is, the steps that all of us on this call can engage in to build these partnerships with our families. And then the second box, the organizational conditions, that's really what our systems need to do in order for this kind of practice to go to scale. and not be just happening at one individual school or in one individual classroom. We have to create a systemic approach to engagement. So very quickly, the process conditions, again, are all the things that we try to encourage and train and teach people that they need to incorporate in their practice to build partnerships with families. And the first one is the most important piece, and that is you must build relational trust. People will not respond if there's no trust. And trust is built on 4 factors. And this is also from out of Chicago, the research in Chicago from Tony Reich and Barbara Schneider. You've got to build relationships that are based on respect, based on feelings of competence, that you are competent in your role and you see your families as competent human beings and individuals, that it's a relationship built on integrity where we keep our word, and then where we see each other with personal regard. So Paulo Freire talks a lot about this, that we see each other as real human beings, not through the lens of a stereotype. And if there's nothing else that you remember today, I do want you to remember engagement is a strategy, not a goal. But I also want you to understand the importance of the relational trust piece. You will not be able to enter into authentic redesign work with your communities unless your communities can trust you. And that sometimes takes some work. It takes some hard touch work where you're talking to families, you're sharing your stories, families understand your intentions. But again, you're not going to get the real story from a community. You're not going to get the kind of lean in if you don't show up to the space with the intentions of creating trust. So I really wanted to emphasize that. And it's not just something that you think is going to happen organically. You've got to really, really take the time to build these relationships with your families. The other things you want to do, again, is make sure that the engagement, as I said, is linked to goals, so linked to learning and development. You want to do the work out of an asset-based lens. Your work has to be culturally responsive and respectful. That it's, again, through a collaborative mindset, and that you work together in a way that's interactive. And meaning that people get a chance to roll up their sleeves, get a chance to practice and not just be talked at, and things are done with them and not to them. I mentioned your organizational conditions. That's where the system has to provide support. The leadership has to embrace family engagement as important. We have to see it integrated through all aspects of the system. So we're working together on it in all different ways, and it's sustained with resources. When you start doing this work well, this is what we talk about capacity building. One of my colleagues, Monica Higgins, she's identified capacity building as 4 areas that we can build: capabilities, connections, which are our social networks, beliefs, change, and we also become more confident in being able to do the work together. If you look at this graph, you're going to see that over on the left-hand side, our educators and our families are separate. Now they're together. So they're working together in partnership. And for why? For what? To support student and school improvement. And in this case, particularly to make sure that your redesign efforts are successful. So I know that was quick. I sort of ran through that very quickly. There is a wonderful new MOOC that I've designed that really goes into depth on the framework. There's a lot of wonderful videos from practitioners that I think would be helpful to you about how we work together. These are some additional resources for you. We have, like I said, if you want training, these are some ways that you can get some training, from books to an institute that I have at Harvard in the summer. And there's a lot of conferences now that you can attend. So I think that's it for my slides. Again, I know that was a little bit of a whirlwind. I hope that it was that you did get something out of it. And you can always reach me at Harvard. If you Google me, my website comes up and my email is there, and I'd be really happy to hear from any of you who want to have a conversation about this some more. So thank you very, very much.
Dr. Matt, thank you so much for just laying the groundwork for us and framing it so powerfully and identify some of the resources that we can turn to. Now I'm pleased to introduce my colleague, Sarah Cliven, who will moderate tonight's panel. She's a senior researcher and member of LPI's Deeper Learning team. Sarah started her career as a teacher in Philadelphia, and prior to joining LPI, she was a research associate for the Research Alliance for New York Schools. She earned her PhD from NYU's Steinert School of Culture, Education, and Human Development. And one of the overarching research questions that has framed her career is how and in what ways do schools reproduce or disrupt inequality? Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Cheryl. Um, it's great to be here. Good evening, everyone. I'm very excited about our panel tonight, but before we transition to the panel, we thought it would be helpful to just have some time to pause, reflect on the presentation from Dr. Mapp. And so in the chat, you're going to see a link to a platform. It's called Easy Retro. If you are like me and experience, how should I say this, like an internal groan when you need to engage with a new platform, let me just assure you it's incredibly simple. I'm going to demonstrate quickly. Um, Let me share my screen so I can do that. All right. Hopefully folks can see that. So we're asking folks to just respond to two questions. What is something that resonated with you from the research presentation? And what thoughts and questions did the research presentation raise for you? It's very simple. You just click on the plus sign and then you can type in your response. And we're going to just give folks a few minutes to do that. And, type in your response and look at the responses from other folks that are here in the room too. And for our panelists, I think it would be great if you could take a look too at some of the questions that are coming up, because we may be able to address those when you get to your remarks. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, if you are on a mobile phone, there's a button that says filter by. And if you hit that button, you'll be able to toggle between the two questions. If you're on a computer, you should be able to see both. All right, well, I love all the things I'm seeing so far around engagement is a strategy, not a goal. That came through really strongly. Yeah, that teachers need training on how to effectively engage families. It's not just about being personable or extroverted. There's skills that we need to gain to do this right. The importance of relational trust. And I'm going to ask our panelists and also our folks on the back end who are taking note of all these questions to record all of these great questions that are coming up so we can come back to them during the Q&A. All right. Well, we are really lucky to have panelists joining us from three amazing organizations today: Transcend, Californians for Justice, and Gateway Public Schools. And these organizations are all using really different approaches to engaging families and students and building the leadership of students and families. And so we're going to bring them on one at a time so that they can give you an overview of their work, so that all of us in the room have a good sense of the sort of range of approaches and strategies that are represented here. So let me first introduce our panelists from Transcend. We have J.T. Schultz, and she is a managing partner at Transcend. And then along with her, Tamia Fowler. She is an alumna of Launch High School, and she worked closely with Transcend during Launch's redesign process. So we're so excited to have them both. I'm going to pass the mic to the two of you.
Great. Thank you so much. We're so excited to be here. Transcend is a national nonprofit that works with communities to reimagine what school can be. And I am trying to click. Here we go. And so our visions for all young people to learn in ways that enable them to thrive in and transform the world. And we're excited to share a little bit about how we go about doing that and provide an example from Tamia's old middle school. We believe that this work's got to start locally with community-based design journeys. And we believe that it needs to bring young people, educators, leaders, caregivers, and experts all together, collaboratively designing in order to get those extraordinary experiences and outcomes for every kid in that school community. And so what that looks like with us, oops. I am struggling a little bit with my moving forward. We'll do our best. We believe that you can be creating a school design while also creating the strong conditions that you need in order for that design to work and for your innovation to really take hold. And so when we talk about that, we talk about this community-based process that results in a different design of school and in these strengthened conditions. And that when you have that, you can lead to extraordinary experiences and outcomes for all. When we're actually in these community-based design journeys, what's actually powering it is the design cycle. This is sort of our approach to R&D or design thinking. And so we think you start by learning, then you envision something new, you build it, you try it out, and then it comes right back to learning again. What have we learned from that? And we think that that needs to happen in ways where all groups in the community, and especially students and families, are at the table actually doing that design work together in a sustained long-term way. And we think there's a whole bunch of reasons why this is important and what impact it can have, including that you just get better design decisions that are grounded in your community's needs, that we are more likely for this work to result in sustained success because leaders of districts transition, but the community stays there. And so if the community has been in direct involvement in the design process, it's more likely to be sustained. And then it also can support us all to be thinking about where there might be power dynamics that are off and where we need to challenge sort of the way things have always been done. And so when you put that all together, that's what we mean by a community-based design process. When we talk about community, this is who we're talking about, everyone from the learners and their families at the center, to the school-based staff and educators, to the district and the local and political leaders in the community. And what that can mean for terms I've heard people in the chat saying, like, what are some practical methods? It can mean actually putting students and family members on the design team. So the picture here is our Launch High School. Launch High School is a Brooklyn school that has been a middle school and is growing to be a high school, on an inspiration visit where we went from Brooklyn down to Memphis, Tennessee, to gain inspiration from some really innovative schools. And you'll see this includes students and families actually in there getting inspired and doing the work. We think this can really shift from just informing or consulting the community to involving and really collaborating with the community. And then we also have some resources that are learn activities. So in that design cycle, that includes focus groups and interviews. We have a resource called Conversations with Kids that gives some really practical guidance on how to approach listening to the students themselves. You're going to get a resource that gives you the link to that. And also, we have a student LEAP survey where kids can report directly how they are experiencing school in a number of different ways. On the left here, you see the LEAPs and some examples on the right of what questions they get asked. This is something that's available to anyone who wants to dive into getting some experience data from your community. And I'm going to pass it to Tamia. I know we only have like a minute, so Tamia is going to share a little bit about the design journey at Launch.
Hi, everybody. Again, like we had said earlier, I am an alumna from Launch School and
Transcend is working with Launch right now to build their high school. So as you can see from this very like lengthy launch design journey, we've had around almost 2 years of working through this design process. And part of it is for me and the current students, current parents, and just current faculty members to all talk together and kind of learn what our students and their students need in this new school, because it's a new space for all of us. And what that looks like is basically every other week for 2 hours on Zoom from like 4 to 6, our parents, our teachers, and alumna like myself come on Zoom and talk about things that we need for the new school, things that we didn't work in the middle school, things that did work in the middle school, and kind of just create a lengthy process where we're all having a conversation where everybody's opinions matter in regards to doing what's best for our students. Some of the activities that I've done throughout this journey has been talking to other teachers at the Aurora Institute Symposium in New Orleans. So getting to talk about this process that Transcend does and kind of getting other feedback from other teachers from around the world. I've gotten to take a tour of the land that we are using for the Launch High School, but also just getting to meet current students and getting to work with them as well to hear what they need and how that may have been different from what I needed when I was in middle school. So this process is very helpful and is just something that allows you to get various perspectives in a very natural and very authentic way.
Thank you so much, Tamia. The most inspiring part of the work to me has been the way that these alum like Tamia are so invested in their community that they come back to do this design work for a future high school that they will never personally attend. And it's such a testament to the community that's been built there well before our partnership. The final thing I'll just leave you with is earlier this week, we had our fourth Community Design Day, where we were able to share back the model that we've all been building together to recruit the first ninth grade class. And on the bottom left, we did sort of that night a simulation of what it'll feel like to be at launch, what the experiences will be. And these were the words that folks in the room came up with about how they imagine Launch High School being. And we're so proud of that and so excited in the way that it came from the voices of the community, and it's what's being built is really theirs. That's all for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, JT and Tamia. There's so much to unpack there. I can't wait to get to dive in a little bit more. But for right now, I'm going to bring in Omar Cardenas. Omar is the Senior Director of Base Building, Organizing, and Leadership Development at Californians for Justice. Omar, would you please give us an overview of CFJ's approach to building student leadership and how CFJ centers students in school redesign?
I forgot I have to unmute myself. Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. And good evening and welcome to all of our audience and participants. Like Sarah said, my name is Omar Cardenas, pronouns he, him, and I am the Senior Director of Base Building, Organizing, Leadership Development at Californians for Justice, or CFJ. CFJ is a statewide youth organizing organization. We're based in 4 regions across California. We're based in Long Beach, Fresno, San Jose, and Oakland. And we serve and maintain approximately 300 members or young people every year through our programs and our campaigns. And we've been fighting for racial and educational justice in California for the past 29 years. Our organization was born out of the fight to oppose Proposition 209 in the mid-90s, which sought to ban affirmative action in California. So just to speak to a little bit of the question around how we build leaders, broadly speaking, our success as an organizing organization is really predicated on our ability to recruit students into our programs and develop them by moving them through our leadership development ladder. So our hope is that by moving them through these programs and through this leadership development ladder, that we develop lifelong political workers who are protagonists in their communities, places of work, in society at large. We want to develop leaders who have the necessary skills to develop our base building efforts, which essentially looks like young people recruiting young people into this fight for racial and educational justice. We develop leaders who also have a sophisticated political and structural analysis and can not only lead discussions with their peers, but also be able to lead political projects by helping to shape the vision and strategy of the organization, including having the capacity and the temperament to be able to share decision-making power with school sites and district leaders. So our leadership development program essentially was really essential in helping to advance our school redesign work. And in particular, one of the recent projects that we had was here where I'm based out of in the Long Beach Unified School District, or in Long Beach. And so we were partnering with the Long Beach Unified School District to ensure that young people had a seat at the table, right? That they were able to be a part of that redesign process, not only at their school site, but also at the district level. The way that we developed leaders through that leadership ladder was essential to be able to ensure that when we started this project, the young people were able to step into that leadership role and be able to start to envision and make decisions alongside their adult allies, in particular, non-traditional sort of leadership spaces for young people. Between 2020 and 2024, CFJ worked closely with the Long Beach Unified School District to pilot a professional learning network that was focused on addressing the equity issues impacting Black students at 5 comprehensive high schools. At each school, we worked with site leadership to develop design teams made up of students, parents, teachers, and administrators. Each team was responsible for analyzing data from their school site, for example, social emotional learning, graduation, suspension rate, et cetera, and engaging in deep learning, whether that was listening circles, one-on-ones, cultural walks, et cetera, and being able to arrive at a point of unity around the issues, the most pressing issues impacting student success. Our work over those 4 years culminated in a number of youth-led projects that elevated the needs of Black students and supported the human development of adults to be more compassionate, understanding, relationship-centered, less oppressive, and more collaborative with their students. Those site-based projects range from investing in cultural-based programs, such as the establishment of Black student unions, which a lot of our traditional high schools didn't have, culture fairs, student-led trainings on deep listening and implicit bias for staff and admin. As you heard Dr. Matt talk a little bit about the ways in which we need to build trust, like these trainings that were youth-led and we train our young people to provide their school sites were instrumental in being able to set the conditions to build that trust. And we even had students who designed their own podcasts at their school sites to talk about the issues that they were learning about and the data that they were collecting. So this is just a little bit of a nutshell of what the redesign work looked like. And thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Omar. I can already hear so many echoes back to what Dr. Mapp shared earlier around the importance of relational trust. And again, I can't wait to dive in a little bit more deeply with the work you're doing. But let me first welcome Carrie Marr. Carrie Marr is from Gateway Public Schools. She is the SEL coordinator there and a teacher at Gateway High School. Carrie, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to give us an overview of what student-led conferencing looks like at Gateway.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. And I'm actually going to let a couple of our students talk about what it's like first.
Hi, my name is Ari. I'm 15 years old and I am a current 9th grader.
Oh, my name is Asim. I'm 15 and 6'5".
All right, you two. What was it like to lead your own conference?
Easy, and also because I already built a bond with like my advisor, so like it didn't feel like really stressful, and like I had to be like robotic, and I had to like it just felt like really relaxed, and it was pretty fun.
What was it like for your family?
I think honestly they were kind of like happy, and they're also kind of like happy to meet my advisor. He's also nice and stuff like that, but they were also kind of like proud of me because my grades aren't bad, and
All right, if you were thinking about other schools that are thinking about doing student-led conferences, why should schools do them?
I personally think it's better to have a student-led conference because it gives the student the chance to reflect. It gives them the chance to reflect on everything they've done and like what work and like what they feel proud of and like where they want to improve. But it's kind of, I know like the way I think about it, it's helping students for their future. Like especially if you want to take on a career that involves talking to people, being engaged, and all that, it gives you the chance to to better your like presenting skills, and also like it like kind of just brings communities together, and I think it's really helpful.
Honestly, she nailed it on that one. Yeah, there's not really much more to add.
Wanted to start with them. It was really hard to edit that video down to be short. But so where we started with redesigning our student-led conferences in 2023 was that our student life team resumed some pre-pandemic work of thinking about how to do parent-teacher conferences differently. And we had them before COVID, and we even continued them on Zoom, but we didn't have capacity to reimagine. And they were really sort of deficit focused, kids on a hot list, kids who are struggling, we're going to get them in. And I think Dr. Mapp's framework really resonates with this, with what we were trying to do differently around building trust, building connections, centering students, and all of that. So our redefined purpose was really threefold. And as you can see, we wanted to start with students first. What is their experience going to be? How does it connect to our school-wide goals? And then what do we want the experience of families and staff to be? And again, I heard Dr. Mapp say students need this connection and being able to talk in this way with their families, but teenagers, they might need a little support and some practice to do so. So the way that we provide that support is that they complete a reflection on productive struggle, which is one of the things we've really been working on through an SEL lens. And I'm not going to go through this form in detail because it's linked in your resources, but they do it in 9th grade seminar, which is a class, and it's the class I teach. But then it also bridges into their advisory, where our 9th graders present the assignment to the 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, who all also have to complete it. And those older students just send a copy home to their families. But the 9th graders use this reflection and then develop an agenda to run a conference with their family. And so some of the things that we've really learned from this process, when we think about some of those practical strategies, it's very important to reduce barriers to entry for families, which means our conferences are all live, but there's a Zoom option. Again, having students have multiple settings where they're working on it, really focusing on welcoming and belonging. I saw questions about like, well, what if families aren't, having the student and advisor call together is a really compelling way to get a parent to schedule, as opposed to me sending an email. And one of the big questions that we're thinking about for next year, having done this now 2 years in a row, there's still some traditional expectations that adults have around what conferences are, or like, parents just want to know, how's my kid doing? And sometimes because of adultism, they want to hear that from another adult. And so how are we centering our values and also making an explicit connection between our values as a school community, the student experience, and the very real and important questions that families have about their learners? I'll pause there. And if you want to hear more about a parent perspective or an advisor perspective, we have both in the panel. My colleague Becca Weeder has been an advisor at Gateway for a long time and is this year the parent of a 9th grader. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Carrie. And thank you all. I can tell already just from what we've heard so far that this is going to be a really rich discussion. So I'm excited to get you all speaking to each other. And I also want to invite Becca Weeder to come on screen. She's the co-principal at Gateway High School, and she's going to join us for the panel. Okay, I think she's on. Okay. Welcome, Becca. So one of the things that I feel like has come up in Dr. Mapp's presentation and, and the introductions that you all gave us is that authentic family and student engagement and leadership development is, as much as we know that these are so important, they're not going to happen on their own. There are structures and supports that we need to help these things happen in our schools. So I'm really, Carrie, you already started sharing what some of these structures and systems look like. So maybe I'll start with some of the other panelists. I'm curious to hear if you could tell us about one or two key structures or systems that you've put in place to support the engagement of students and families, and if you could just describe how these structures actually engage students and families. I wonder, JT, would you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah, sure, happy to. So at Transcend, our work is really in the design process. And so when schools are either launching a new school that they're trying to design or redesigning and reimagining their school. And so our structures, we talked about these briefly. One is putting students and families on the actual community-based design team. So they're actually at the table doing the work alongside educators, alongside administrators, alongside community members. And so that's, I think, a way that it's a real structure. It's like a standing 2-hour meeting every other week. There's also going out on school visits to be inspired from outward. There's also members of that community design team, including students and families, engaging in the learn work, which are a bunch of methods, including leading focus groups, leading interviews, actually being trained, right, to do those things effectively, so that they're actually part of the design process at every level. They are there in the design sprints, supporting the actual stuff that we're creating. And then they're also then the voice of the design back to the rest of the community, the wider community. So we're having these community design days where the community design team members, including students and families, are the voice of that, where they're presenting back to wider audiences, here's what we've designed, and being the ones who gather the feedback, and all parts of that learn, envision, build, try cycle.
Tamia, I'm wondering if you might want to add on to that at all in terms of the way you experience some of those structures and systems.
Definitely. I think that it's so interesting in my experience with the design team right now. It's been really interesting to see how surprised that parents are or like even teachers are about what their learners want, because all learners want to learn. They just want to be accommodated towards, and a lot of the time, and for so long, they haven't been. So once they're let into a space, a lot of adults say like, "Hey, they're gonna have their camera off, or they're not gonna say anything in this conversation." But most of the time, if not all the time, they're leading these discussions and they're asking questions of their peers, they're asking questions of their teachers, and they're asking questions from alum like, "What did you learn from this process?" Like for me, I was the founding class of launch middle school, so a lot of questions sometimes get thrown at me like, "Hey, to me, like we know that when we first started with you, it was kind of like we just threw whatever we could to make sure that you were still getting the education you deserved. However, we're super new at this and this was our first time doing it. So what did you like and what didn't you like?" And those are coming from students rather than my old teachers or now colleagues. And that's kind of the best part, because in a lot of spaces, it's very intimidating for students to be able to come on and say how they feel without feeling like they're going to get repercussions afterwards, or without feeling like they're being judged, or they have to kind of like code switch a little bit because adults are in the room. Is a very like just authentic conversation, which I can appreciate. And just as like from an older now student in the workplace, I always say like I'm a student forever, but and as a student in the workplace, I would say like it's a great level of conversation.
And also just name on a structural level, part of that was that, all the steps that it takes to become a strong team that can communicate effectively together, the community agreements that we've all, put together to serve as sort of the framing for all the spaces we're in, were all contributed to by all members of the community design team. And so they're a little different than some other teams we're on. They really bring out, well, what do you need the conditions of this space to be to feel like you can bring up all the ideas that you have and to feel that you're being trusted and your contributions matter. And we really hold ourselves accountable to that, coming back to them at the start of every meeting, every member of the team identifying which team agreement they especially want to lean into today, and process checking ourselves at the end, both in terms of shout outs to each other for the ways in which we leaned into that, and where we could grow further. But the idea that all of that comes from the group that's actually doing it, which includes stakeholders across all the different roles in the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm appreciating how you tied this back to this idea that none of this works without relational trust. And how do these structures build that kind of trust amongst all these different folks who are coming together? Omar, I'm curious to hear from you. Are there particular structures or systems that you're using to engage students and families to build trust across the groups that you're bringing together in your organizing work?
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, I think for us, it's a little bit different, right? Because we're not in the institution, we're outside, right? We're an organizing organization. So our role is a little bit different, right? We're the ones challenging and doing the accountability piece from the community perspective, right? We're knocking on doors. We're trying to get in and sort of force that conversation around redesign and transformation. And so I think for us, it starts internal though, right? It starts with our own practice and our own systems within our organization to be able to really learn from our own practice of what this can look like potentially in the classroom or in the school site setting, right? And so for us, some of the things that we do internally to create student engagement and student leadership is I mean, we have young people that sit on our board, right? So a lot of our members and alumni are part of our board of directors. They help to shape the strategic orientation of the organization. We have, as part of our sort of campaign strategy team, we have young people who work alongside staff members to do a lot of the planning and strategizing for our political work, right? For our organizing campaigns. So young people are literally at every table within the organization, helping to shape the direction of our work, right? And that's really important to us. And the way that we've been able to do that and ensure that we're not just tokenizing young people, just having young people at the table to have them there, is really taking a really rigorous approach to developing those relationships, starting like we have regular one-on-ones with these young folks, weekly one-on-ones to not only check on them in debrief meetings, but also providing a lot of social and emotional support to be able to not only navigate the work that they're doing in CFJ, but also family and home life and all of that, right? And we're not therapists, so it can be challenging at times, but our staff members, our organizers do a lot of social emotional support to be able to really support young people to carry the lift, right? But that work has really translated and informed some of our major policy wins in California. So in 2012, we won the local control funding formula, which created it was essentially a way to create a more equitable funding formula to center the needs of low-income foster youth and English learners. And in 2014, we were able to win some amendments in the local control funding formula to ensure that student voice, student engagement was a part of the district's local control accountability plans, right? So that was a fight that was won alongside other youth-led allies in California and really ensured that these systems and these structures were provided for not only families, but students as part of the planning process. And most recently now in 2020, we made history in Oakland as part of the Oakland Youth Vote Coalition, where we were able to win a historical sort of, thing, which was that we lowered the voting age to 16 in Oakland, where now young people are able to vote for their school board members. So Oakland is the first major city in the United States to do it. And so that when we talk about like shared decision-making power, that's what we're talking about, right? Like actual tangible wins where our young people can have a real seat at the table, right? And not just be a checkbox. So yeah, I think a lot of it starts internal, and it's through rigorous practice that then we're able to inform what those system change and policy change can look like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. Well, I wanna hear from the panelists about, we heard from Dr. Mapp about all of the benefits and all of the impacts that this kind of work has, but I'd love to hear from, our practitioner panel. What have you observed in terms of the impact that engaging students and families has on students and families? How is this changing um, what kind of changes are you seeing as a result of these practices on students and families or on school communities more broadly? And maybe I'll kick it to Becca Weeder because I'm curious to hear as not just a principal, but as a parent, what the student-led conferencing feels like for you.
Yeah, there are so many layers for me with the student-led conference. But I think it goes back to building relationships happens with kind of each small interaction over time. And so the student-led conference is one moment, an important moment that kind of builds a foundation in each student and family's connection to the school. And I will say also as an advisor, I really can see how it builds an important connection between the student and the caregiver. And I can see that for myself as a caregiver. In a student-led conference, it provides a structure for a kind of interaction that doesn't really naturally happen between caregivers and young people. And they get to see each other in a way that they don't usually, and maybe say things that they wouldn't say unless they were in kind of a facilitated space that allows you to kind of be vulnerable and share from the heart in this particular way. Say what you're proud of, for both people to say that. And so I think those kind of like heart-opening interactions really starts building a culture of trust between kind of like the three pillars of the school. So the school staff, the caregiver, and the student are building connectedness. And so, student-led conference is kind of like what Dr. Mapp was saying. It's not a goal in and of itself. It's a strategy that's part of building that interconnectedness. But I think it's a great place to start, especially we really focus on doing it with our incoming students as one of the first kind of touch points that families have with us in person or on Zoom.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, Timmy, I mean, I just feel like we're so lucky to have you here because you were a student that was engaging in a redesign process. What was the experience like for you? How did it impact you? What did it feel like to go through that experience?
It was so much fun, honestly and truly, because one, I loved launch, even though like I was a guinea pig since it was just like their first experience doing this type of thing with their students, and it was a new school. But I loved my experience when I was a middle schooler, and they helped me get into my high school, and then also just stayed in touch. Launch was is definitely a school that stayed in touch for a long time. So it was fabulous to be able to not only reflect on my own experiences in middle school, but also high school. Because Launch didn't have a high school, they helped me get into Berkeley Carroll, which is another school in New York City. And I got to bring what I've learned from there, which I also have worked at that school as well as an alum. So bringing what I've learned from there as well to that space and recognizing that it's different and seeing what we can pull and we can't pull. So it's been so much fun to get to talk to like my old teachers about things that I have learned growing up. It feels like a very reflective time for both of us to kind of just see how we excelled in communication and how things might have got lost in trying to make sure everything was getting done. So it was like a mix of a lot of different things, a lot of emotions. I think for me particularly is just very satisfying, as well as just like it just feels very good to be able to have very authentic conversations about building up our future learners, and talking to their parents also about like what they're scared of for their child to go to high school, what they're scared of for like a new experience that they don't understand. And um it's new for me as well. So like being able to have those conversations were difficult at first because I felt like I was out of place at times, but then like knowing that my opinion was valued was very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, there's so many other questions that I want to ask, but I also want to bring in our audience questions. So, okay, let me ask one more question because, at the Center for System and School Redesign and at LPI more broadly, we're really trying to think about how to bring these kind of practices to scale so that we're not just seeing them in bright spots here and there, but, that we're really starting to see all students have access to the kinds of practices, strategies that you're talking about. So I'm curious to hear from you if are there challenges that have emerged? Oh, not challenges, but school or district policies that you felt like had to be navigated, reimagined, amended in order to facilitate meaningful student and family engagement, because that helps us start to think systemically about what has to change.
Well, I can start off in naming that when we get into working with a school, because we have a clear perspective that this is going to be a community-driven process, we really have to have direct conversations with the leadership and governance of that school about, if you want to do this, you're saying you want to share power. You're saying you are inviting community members, and we're not going to do this work unless you are authentically like all in for that. And so it feels like that conversation needs to be had. And you really need to make sure that everyone's feeling, we call it at Transcend, like the conditions for innovation. We talk about it like what needs to be true in the fertile soil for this thing to work, right? Like a tree growing in fertile soil. And one of those things is coalition, right? Like, are you actually aiming to have coalition of wanting to go the same direction? And are you going to give equal voice to all of these different stakeholders who you're inviting to the table? Because we absolutely can't, Dr. Mapp talked about, it can't be it's a strategy, not a goal. You can't do it and then say, check, we did it. And it can't be like just a nice to have or like an add-on. We think it has to really be like at the heart of the work. And if you're going to do that, you have to challenge some existing power structures. You have to challenge a top-down mindset about decision making. You have to challenge who's in like positional power. And so unless you're willing to like really go there, like really think about that, I would say you don't even like, I would caution about starting anything that's that's bringing students and families to the table if you aren't totally committed to really acting on the things that you are asking them for. That has to be a designing with and not for.
Gateway folks or Omar, anything you would want to add about essentially policy barriers, things that stand in your way from doing the work that you do?
Carrie, you want to go? You got anything? Sure, I'll be quick. I know we want to get to Q&A. But yeah, no, double check, triple check on what JT said in terms of this notion of sharing power and being real about that. I think that is certainly something that we've experienced both at the site level, but also at the district level, that takes time, and that's not always something that happens immediately, right? That sort of trust building that Dr. Matt talked about is essential to being able to do that. But I also think that one of the practice, I don't know if it's quite policy, but a practice that we sort of experience is that oftentimes districts will have multiple equity policies, right, or initiatives rather, that they're trying on. They're doing things all over the place, and these things oftentimes are really siloed, and they're not coming together to sort of inform a unified strategy around how we're going to improve conditions, do the transformation work, how these things sort of intersect, how do they build off each other, so on and so forth. Our work and the design teams with the school sites, the 5 school sites they were working with, really siloed from all of the other equity initiatives that they were doing. So while we were trying on doing a particular type of research, which we really modeled after Shane Saphir's street data research, was really different and almost in contradiction to the type of research that they were doing in these other equity initiatives. And so really the sort of push or the call is for districts to break down these silos and start to do more integration of these equity initiatives. I'll pause there.
I'm sure there's a lot more we could talk about, but I do want to turn to we got a lot of great questions from the audience, so I want to turn to as many of those as I can. And I think Dr. Mapp has graciously agreed to stay on with us to answer a few questions, and we appreciate that because we all know she's flying off somewhere really early in the morning. So thank you, Dr. Mapp. So one question we have is about families that are furthest from the center, that are the hardest to reach. What are some practical steps that can bring families in?
So I'll jump in. I do always sometimes question like who gets to define what the center is. So when we say our families who are furthest from the center, like does the center have a defined way of being? Because sometimes that's what keeps families from entering, because we have a perception of what the center should look like. So certain types of behaviors, certain types of practices. And when our families get wind, and they do very quickly, of what we validate as practice that we like, things that they do that we like, then the families who can't do those things because either they, were working 2 jobs, because I saw that here, they don't speak English, they pick up our picture of what a family should do in order to be considered valuable in our setting. So the first thing we have to do is sort of ask ourselves, who are we validating? Is there a small group of families who get all the attention? It's kind of just like our kiddos, right? So what we want to do is to say, okay, first of all, we're going to have to go to them, because for many of these families, again, the school or the institution has not been friendly, and they haven't got any signals that it's changed. So sometimes we have to say, okay, we're going to go to our families, go where they are. In Boston, we did things at nail shops, barber shops, where we sat and asked families, particularly our younger parents, what is it that they would need or want from us? What do they need to see from us? How do we need to show up in order for them to also want to work with us in partnership? And so we did a lot of outreach. A lot of times we want our families to do in-reach. We did a lot of outreach, and we asked the families, what do we need to do to be, for you to feel like we're going to be authentic partners with you? And so we had to do things very differently. Sometimes it meant, one of my good friends in New York talked about they changed their meeting times to Saturday mornings, because that's when a lot of their families were shopping with the push carts and whatnot. And so they did quick meetings, not taking a lot of time. She supported schedules so that her staff could do that and then maybe get some time off during the week. But a lot of it has to do with asking families how they would like us to show up. Because if we keep guessing and saying, well, there's a group of families who are furthest from the center, then, and don't go out to where they are to ask them what they need, then, You know, we inadvertently, and like I said, without training, sometimes this happens. And so I'm not, I'm not blaming anybody in the audience because this is hard work. But we inadvertently send a signal that this is what we're looking for and not this. And consequently, we would do the same thing. We stay away.
I see another question here from the audience, and it's sort of looking at looking at some of the challenges that we're facing right now about funding being jeopardized. The question is, how can we provide equitable resources and opportunities to students when we know that funding is going to be jeopardized, especially for those students?
I mean, that's a hard question. Like funding is always jeopardized, right? In education. And I think lack of resources is always a barrier that we're facing. And I think sometimes as a teacher, it becomes part of our narrative about like all of the deficits of the system. Like I never have enough time. And like even at this great school that I love working at that compensates me, I think in a lot of ways really fairly compared to that, like it's never enough. And so then it can start to feel like, well, there isn't enough. And one way is to look, I was thinking about this when we talked about the policy stuff. What are the other resources that already exist in our community that can help bridge some of those gaps that aren't on us? So for example, Gateway is the most diverse high school in San Francisco. Even though we only have, 450 kids, there's a lot of languages represented. And we have lots of people on staff who speak one of those languages, which is Spanish. So doing Spanish translation, we've been able to manage in-house, but like, what are we doing for all of our Arabic speaking families? What are we doing for our Cantonese speaking families? And realizing, oh, there's this whole network of people to draw from. We have alums, we have other parents who are bilingual, we have this thing in San Francisco called Language Line, which is imperfect, but at least we can use. And like a part of the video I had to edit out was Ari talking about her mom coming to her conference, who isn't usually the person who comes to the school because her dad is the primary English speaker in the family. But because we have these other ways, if we can find those other resources, even though the context is hard, and I don't want to minimize that, like it's already been hard and we're looking ahead to some times where it's going to be harder. And like, who else can we build with instead of just thinking we have to know everything within the system or the institution that we're in, and that we have to be able to do it all.
Okay, I'm gonna throw out one more question because the questions are just so good. And then we'll move to closing and a reflection activity and some breakout rooms. But we got a question about what type of activities do you do to get to know your students and families so that you can tap into their funds of knowledge? And I would kind of like to just broaden that to like, what are some of the most impactful experiences that you've had with engaging students and families? I think that could be a really nice way to end.
Teachers have done a lot of really interesting things that help students kind of be in the driver's seat of learning about their families and communities. And then we as the staff, through that connection, can learn a lot as well. So when students are interviewing a family member for a project or going out into the community to do service and then coming back to share that, that can really grow our collective understanding of our community and our students and families, and can do it in a way that it's not like anthropological. Like students are the ones driving that, and it's for kind of our collective good.
Anyone else want to
I
jump?
also think, sorry. I also think that I was typing in the chat, we have exhibition nights and thinking about what Dr. Mapp was saying about like who's far from the center. The thing that bridges families and staff is our students. Like that's the reason that we're all in this together, and families want to show up most when they know that it's their young people who are going to have something to say or something to do. And so the more that we can center student voice in those events and times where we're asking families to come in to us, if we're asking them to come to us, we need to offer them something that's really valuable and meaningful, which is their young people getting to show off how amazing they are. And I think that that is one place where we can build more of that connection.
Okay, well, I want to thank all of our panelists so much. It is really a privilege to get to hear from practitioners who are doing incredible work. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. And I think with that, I'm going to pass it to Cheryl to close us out. You're muted, Cheryl.
I did that favored Zoom thing. Sorry. I'm really excited. The time went so quickly, and we had a written reflection that we wanted to prompt you with, and I will share that in a moment. But I really just want to echo Sarah's appreciation for our panel. You were phenomenal, and the questions also from all of the participants were really great ones. And I think we could continue to talk all evening, but unfortunately, we don't have time to do so. But what I want to share as we end our evening together is that we're just grateful you were here to join in this conversation. And we have a number of other seminars coming up with the center, and we hope that you might join us for those. Our next one is in April, and it is focused on really ensuring that our educators are prepared for these redesigned schools. And then our final one, the 7th in May, is around how we engage communities in schooling, kind of carrying on this theme, and we'll highlight a number of community school models. So we hope you might come back for those conversations. We also want to just encourage you to sign up to be updated about other events and opportunities and resources through the center webpage. And there's a link in the chat that you are allowed to, we welcome you to kind of, we welcome you to sign up so that you will be able to continue to be in conversation with us. So I am going to invite you, if you are able, to stay in for breakout discussions. We'd like you just to think about what you heard from the research framing and our panelists, and think about those conversations in your particular context. So if you're able to jot a few ideas down, and we'll move you to breakout sessions, but we hope to see you again. And for those of you who can stay on, just hold on for one moment and you'll get invited to a breakout room, and we'll be joined by a LPI staff member to facilitate those conversations. We'll have just about 7 minutes for those breakout discussions. So thank you all, and we hope to see you again for our next webinar series. Be well.